Hillary Clinton is under fire for using the term super predator to describe African American youth. She did this in the 90s, and the video is emerging and circling the internet now.
They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel.
You called out President Clinton for defending Secretary Clinton's use of the term super predator back in the 90s when she supported the crime bill. Why did you call him out?
Because it was a racist term and everybody knew it was a racist term.
No conscience.
It's a very well thought out crime bill that is both smart and tough.
No empathy.
Called black youth super predators in 1994. Please explain to the record.
Because it was a racist term and everybody knew it was a racist.
Now, she's also been accused of contributing to mass incarceration due to the fact that she lobbied for the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, which led to mass incarceration, predominantly of African Americans and Latinos. So the question is, what is the role of the Clintons when it comes to mass incarceration? So The Atlantic explains, in 1992, when Bill Clinton flew back to Arkansas to oversee the execution of a mentally retarded African-American murderer, the move helped him in New Hampshire's Democratic primary. In 1994, Clinton's crime bill, which among other things, expanded the death penalty, encouraged states to lengthen prison sentences, and eliminated federal funding for inmate education, garnered the votes of every Democratic senator except one. Now, Bill and Hillary Clinton are not unilaterally responsible for mass incarceration. I think it'd actually be unfair to solely attribute it to them, but it is important to know their role and how mass incarceration got started. So it started with Nixon's war on drugs that each subsequent president continued, and Ronald Reagan played a huge role as well. Slate explains that Reagan engineered passage of 23 other anti-crime measures, including dilution of the insanity defense, oppressive forfeiture laws, abolishment of parole, and mandatory minimum sentences for offenses involving weapons, not to mention the Sentencing Reform Act. So when you look at data, the trend is evident. There is an explosion of mass incarceration with the onset of the war on drugs, and now when the private prison industry came to fruition, it became lucrative to lock people up, which obviously had a huge impact on mass incarceration. Now, when you talk about mass incarceration, you have to talk about the racial implications. So when you look at the facts, African Americans and Latinos were disproportionately impacted by these laws. Now, I added the white percentages to show you how much of the population each of these racial groups makes up. So even though African Americans make up less than 13% of the total population, their incarceration rate is nearly 6 times higher than that of whites. Now, to be fair to both of them, Bill Clinton regrets this bill, and he states that he had a direct role in contributing to mass incarceration. Hillary Clinton is now against this bill too.
I want to ask you, do you really believe I pointed a gun at 2 or 3 cops without a single shot being fired, a young black man, and...
Rapper Meek Mill was on CNN's Smirconish and gave a truly powerful reality check to both the host and viewers. Now, before I get to these 2 clips here, I have to set it up. So, Meek Mill has now become a criminal justice reform advocate. So he recently put out this op-ed in the New York Times. Meek Mill, prisoners need a new set of rights. Like many who are now incarcerated, I was the victim of a miscarriage of justice. I got lucky, but because of dysfunctional, discriminatory rules, most don't.
The criminal justice system has a set of rights created to protect you. But do you think it's really protecting us? You had a right to remain silent, but that really means you had a right to be silenced, doubted, interrogated, suspected. The color of your skin can and will be used against you in the court of law. In their hands, we're incarcerated 5 times more often than white people convicted for the same crimes. You have a right to attorney during questioning. In some states, 80% of criminal defendants can't even afford an attorney. So an overworked public defender controls your fate. One government employee, countless lives at stake. You had a right to be innocent until proven guilty. But somehow, about 47% of the wrongly convicted are black. And if they do prove you're guilty, they're gonna write you a run-on sentence, on average 20% longer than white defendants accused of the same crime. Even if you get out, you're still not free. When you're ex-con, they had a right to deny you a bank account, deny you a mortgage, deny you a job, deny your vote. And if you don't remain perfect, with the smallest slip-up, smallest infraction, the most honest mistake, you're gonna join us, the 80% who come back to prison within 5 years, as I did. That's when you realize they didn't bring us here to thrive. They brought us here to build this. The plantation and the prison are actually no different. The past is the present. It ain't no coincidence. This was the plan since abolition, to keep us subjugated by creating this system. But I believe in a different set of rights. The right to stand up and be heard. The right to reform a broken justice system and build a new future. We had the right to be silent. Now it's our right to speak up. Do you understand these rights as I read them to you?
So, if you don't know the backstory here, Meek Mill was arrested and sentenced to 2 to 4 years for popping a wheelie. Now, it was technically, the way they handed this out, it was technically breaking his probation, but it wasn't really, because they were able to fight it and actually get him out on bail after 5 months, thanks to how high profile the case was and the fact that it was ridiculous to begin with. Now, let me get to this first clip here where, Meek Mill just starts the conversation.
I have to play devil's advocate and ask Meek Mill this. You wrote that piece for the New York Times, and not only did I read what you wrote and watch the video, but I also read the comments that were appended to it. Many of them were supportive, but many of them, Meek said, hey, you're not the right guy to take on this fight. I can put one on the screen of just something that was typical. I'm not defending our criminal justice system at all, but let's look at the facts. It was more than just a wheelie. We don't know his juvenile record. He got probation, on and on and on, got convicted for selling drugs, possessing a firearm. Essentially, it makes the argument you didn't play by the rules. And if you had played by the rules, I'm going to give you the chance, but if you hadn't played by the rules, you wouldn't have had issues with the system.
I always dreamed too of being like on like CNN and being able to express myself and speak for like the voiceless young men of America. The first step I would say, I grew up in America in a ruthless neighborhood where we are not protected by police. We grew up with people selling drugs on our neighborhood, on our front steps. We grew up in ruthless environments. We grew up around murder. You see murder 7 days a week. I think if you grew up in my neighborhood, you see 7 people die a week, I think you would probably carry a gun yourself. Would you?
Yeah, I probably would.
Yeah,
yes.
if you seen your neighbors and family members, or you seen one of your best friends you grew up with get your brains blown out, I think you would want to protect yourself. Second of all, my first juvenile arrest, going to school, being suspended, I didn't want to tell my mother that I was suspended from school because my mom would have to take off from work. She was a single parent, and my father was in the graveyard. So, I was afraid to tell my mom I was suspended. I went to school on a suspended day. That was my first arrest as a juvenile for being in school. I guess the charge was trespassing.
A lot of people make, and that's just that the system in general works, which, it's so absurd if you actually look at the data. So the U.S. has 5% of the world's population, yet 21% of its prisoners. And of course, tops the list worldwide at 665 per 100,000 people. Now, the number looks even more stark when you compare it to OECD countries, which is a collection of 34 industrialized nations. So that 665 just looks completely absurd next to, every other country here: Turkey, Israel, Chile, New Zealand, Czech Republic. You go down the list, no one is even close in terms of OECD countries to the U.S. in their incarceration rate. And on top of that, the recidivism rate in the U.S. is 65%, meaning more than half of people that go to jail go back to jail. And more than half of those that go back to jail are back in jail because of technical violations on their probation or their parole. So again, oftentimes these are not people that are actually committing more heinous crimes. These are simply something like popping a wheelie and having that send them back to jail.
I don't know how people could say that they don't think I should be the face of it. I was wrongly accused. I was sent to jail multiple times for not even committing crime. I've been sent to jail at least 2 or 3 times just for being addicted to Percocets and never sent to rehab. I was sent to jail for popping a woolly. If you follow me on Instagram, which many of these kids in America do, I've been popping woolies on my Instagram across America for the last 10 years, and I never was arrested. The farthest it ever went was a traffic ticket. And my whole message to get across is, if somebody like myself who's doing so good for myself, I'm not involved in crime, I've been working, I employ people, I pay taxes, if probation can stalk me down and bring me back to a state penitentiary without committing crime, what could it do to these other kids that are trapped in these environments surrounded by crime and violence? They don't stand a chance. You have thousands of kids that will be destined to be put in prison for the rest of their life. Their beds are already made up. The criminal justice system has a set of rights created to protect you. But do you think it's really protecting us? The color of your skin can and will be used against you in the court of law. In their hands, we're incarcerated 5 times more often than white people convicted for the same crimes.
Like, if you're black in America, I mean, you've seen the studies, you've seen the statistics, you've seen riots. Like, things are not good. You're not being treated well. And you would think that the worst place to be would be where you see riots happening, like Ferguson. Mm-hmm. But actually, it's Madison, Wisconsin. No place are black people more poor in relation to the white people around them than Madison, Wisconsin. Nowhere else do black children get arrested more often in comparison with white children than Madison, Wisconsin.
What do you think is causing that? I mean, why is this one area in your assessment from working there for 10 years? Like, why is it like this? There's
a ton of different factors. And all the factors boil down to racism. I know it's kind of condescending for me to be a white guy from the Midwest calling racism on everybody, but I'm just going to tell you what I've observed and, what the numbers show.
Really, what's important, one of the things you pointed out was in specific crimes, sure, where a white guy and a black guy with no record did the exact same thing, the difference in punishment between the white guy or the black guy.
Best example is burglary. But teenagers do burglary a different way. They wait till somebody's out of town that they know, and they rob their parents' house. And they'll take their PlayStations and they'll take their liquor and everything, and they get caught. They'll usually do a couple of them, and they'll get caught in a group. And if that's your first trip into the justice system, you are probably, in Dane County, you're probably going to get a deferred prosecution agreement. And if you keep your nose clean, you'll get an expunction, which is where the judge says, I don't think the community would be harmed, and I think you would be helped by making it like this never happened. So the police can keep a report of it, but nobody will ever know. So the black kids don't get the offer of expunction right out of the gates. The white kids do. And then they do, because they are 19. And so they'll steal for that, they'll get popped again, or they'll get popped for curfew. And now the deferred prosecution agreement is pulled, and so they're technically convicted of a felony. At that point, the white kids will still have options of saying, like, let me give this another shot. I'll plead to more offenses. I'll plead to more of the bail jumpings. Let's haggle. Let's haggle on what we're going to do, because they've already entered a plea on the record to the felony for burglary. So they still have options. And at the end of it, they're going to get probation. They might get 6 months conditional time in jail, but they're going to get probation. And the black kids who fought the same way, who were charged with the same offense, in my experience, and what everybody else notices, they go to prison. They just off to prison, and then they get probation. Black kids, one chance, prison. And once they go to prison, you don't really get out of that system very long, because they just keep catching you up on probation or parole violation.
Reforming the justice system is something rapper Meek Mill thinks is a long overdue process, and he is fighting to overturn his 2008 drug and weapon conviction and says it's a battle that's much bigger than him. And he's here to tell us why. This started for you 11 years ago. You were convicted of a drug and weapons charge at 19 in Philly. Can you just break down what happened?
Basically, being a city kid, I don't know who come from some of the ghettos of America where, you know, you got some environments are ruthless environments, and we grew up in these environments from a child. And actually, I was arrested by a narcotic strike force unit, and, you know, same old story, black kid beat, locked up, charged with 30, 40 charges, and when I went to court, I was found guilty for 40 of them charges. Right there, you can see my mug shot.
Yeah, how'd your eye get like that?
Actually, same thing that happened to Rodney King. It just was, it wasn't as brutal as his. And, you know, I got beat down. The cops said we did everything under the book. Actually, you had a group of cops that I pointed a firearm at, 2, 3 of them. And this is before the age of, like, body cameras and phone videos. So if you get alleged by a cop and you're a young black kid, you found guilty. Me, I had a African-American judge. I thought when she seen my mugshot, she would say, "What happened to your face?" People so used to seeing mugshots of young black men with their face beat up, and nobody never asked. You're the first person that actually ever asked me what happened to my face. And I thought she would give some type of doubt to my case, but, you know, I was found guilty on all charges of something that I didn't do.
And so they were looking for someone else? Was there a description of the person they were looking for?
Since learned as part of the arresting officer's team, there have been a number of guilty pleas and indictments of this whole team in Philadelphia. And in fact, the arrest warrant that was sworn out by this since discredited police officer said they were looking for a 5'8" light-skinned black male. So you can see Meek here is not 5'8" or light-skinned. And there were a number of other discrepancies in that. And then he was the only witness to testify at the trial.
Wow. But this group has been since discredited.
Yes, and that's the reason that we're where we are today, with the district attorney agreeing that Meek's entitled to a new trial.
Well, Meek, you've been on probation for 8 years. What has that been like, probation for 8 years?
You know, it's been a struggle. Like, the way probation is designed, you know, you got two sides of when people say, they hear, like, he violated probation, you go to jail. But first of all, my initial crime, I got found guilty for pointing a firearm at 3 officers, which we know if I pointed a firearm at 2, 3 officers in the middle of the night, we wouldn't be doing the view today. But at the same time, even with probation, you just gotta live a straightforward life where you can't even make a mistake. A technical violation is not committing a new crime.
No.
It's not actually.
You can get a tech for jaywalking. You can get a tech for getting a speeding ticket.
For police contact. And where we come from in city kids, you get police contact at least once a week. Right now, we in New York. I live in Philadelphia. If I make a mistake and go through the Lincoln Tunnel and get pulled over, that's a technical violation. I can get up to 4, 5, 6 years in jail just for taking a wrong step the wrong way.
Well, speaking of that, Jordan, last November, after one of these technical violations, Judge Brinkley sentenced Meek to 2 to 4 years in prison, and he served 5 months. The DA and his parole officer said they were against prison time. So how does that happen?
Well, I think exactly as we're discussing, there are technical violations. And when you have a situation, Meek got arrested when he was 19. He's 31 now. He's been on probation ever since. It creates this cycle where you have to report for years and years, and the judge here has taken a very unusual interest in Meek's case. He's got to report his daily schedule to her. He's a musician, he's an entertainer, he's traveling, he's performing, he's recording. He has a very difficult
father too,
and a father of a young son. And he's out working, he's supporting his family.
Thank you.
Well, that's what people generally want. They want someone to be working, supporting their family. That's
exactly
someone that's doing the right thing.
So I think people would sit there and think, well, if you commit more crimes, of course you should go back to jail. But if you say you're going to be in New Jersey and end up in New York instead, across through the Lincoln Tunnel, or you have a reporting violation, what happened here is the judge took a number of things that she claimed were technical violations, strung them together, brought Meek in for a hearing last November. And none of these were crimes that he committed. There were no police charges that ultimately stuck. There were no prosecutions in any cases, and there were minor technical issues. And the judge brought it all in. The district attorney's office, as you said, the probation office that's been supervising Meek, they came into court and they said, we think he's doing great. He's doing exactly what you want someone to do. He's rehabilitated. He's working, supporting people. 2 to 4 years.
So is it?
And thank you very much, everybody. I'm grateful to be here today with members of the House and Senate who have poured their time, and they really have their heart and energy into the crucial issue of prison reform. These members have reached a bipartisan agreement. Did I hear the word bipartisan? Today, I'm thrilled to announce my support for this bipartisan bill that will make our community safer and give former inmates a second chance at life after they have served their time. And we're all better off when former inmates can receive and reenter society as law-abiding, productive citizens. And thanks to our booming economy, they now have a chance at more opportunities than they've ever had before. It is true. Our economy is so strong that when people are getting out of jail, they're actually able to find jobs. And I have 3 instances of companies that hired people coming out of prison, and they are so thrilled by the performance of these people. And now they're doing it more and more and more. A lot of people are saying this. It's great. They wouldn't have had the opportunity, frankly, except for the fact that the economy is so strong. And our pledge to hire American includes those leaving prison and looking for a very fresh start, new job, new life. The legislation I'm supporting today contains many significant reforms, including the following. First, it will provide new incentives for low-risk inmates to learn the skills they need to find employment, avoid old habits, and follow the law when they're released from prison. These incentives will encourage them to participate in vocational training, educational coursework, and faith-based programs that reduce their chances of recidivism and, in other words, reduce their chances of going back to prison substantially. Second, this legislation will allow federal inmates to be placed closer to their home communities in order to help facilitate family visitation. So important because we know that maintaining family and community ties is key to a successful reentry into our society. Third, the bill includes reasonable sentencing reforms while keeping dangerous and violent criminals off our streets. In many respects, we're getting very much tougher on the truly bad criminals, of which, unfortunately, there are many. But we're treating people differently for different crimes. Some people got caught up in situations that were very bad. I give an example of Mrs. Alice Johnson, who served 21 years, and she had, I think, another 25 or so to go. So she would have been in there for close to 50 years for something that other people go in and they get slapped on the wrist, which is also wrong, by the way, which is also wrong. But I'll never forget the scene of her coming out of prison after 21 years and greeting her family, and everybody was crying. Her sons, her grandsons, everybody was crying and hugging and holding each other. It was a beautiful thing to see. It was a very tough situation. Among other changes, it rolls back some of the provisions of the Clinton crime law that disproportionately harmed the African American community. And you all saw that, and you all know that. Everybody in this room knows that. It was very disproportionate and very unfair.
That was Bill Clinton on the receiving end of some harsh words last night. Clinton was in Watts, California, campaigning at a restaurant for his wife. The criticism came from a woman in the crowd who was upset about the former president signing a controversial federal crime bill in 1994 that created lengthy sentences for many drug offenses.
So let's take a closer look at what's in this plan and its prospects for becoming law with Carrie Johnson of NPR. Hello, Carrie. So we've just heard Mark Holden's explanation. Anything you would add from your perspective of somebody who's been watching this for a long time?
Yeah, I think I've been covering these issues for 6 years, and today really felt like a breakthrough. The notion that President Trump, who campaigned on law and order, has actually thrown his weight behind a plan that would reduce some prison sentences for convicted drug criminals is a big deal. As one advocate told me, it's a Nixon goes to China moment.
What's going on, America? This is B. Tatum again. Hey, I want to talk to you guys about what the president endorsed and the steps that he took forward in prison reform just yesterday. And I think it's invaluable to have this conversation. I think it's invaluable for us as Americans to really understand and identify exactly what happened. This was a big step for America. This was a huge step for reversing the effects of over incarceration in this country. Some people may not believe it. You can come up with your own solutions, but when you look at the numbers, we are over incarcerating people in this country. And I think the over incarceration doesn't necessarily deal in racism and all the other things that some people try to project, but it deals in the fact that we are arresting people, and not even just arresting people, we are sentencing people and having people in prison for things that they shouldn't be in prison for. It's a waste of taxpayer dollars, and it's a waste and a deterrent in morality for our citizens moving forward. So the president, the First Step Act that he endorsed, made it through the House, bipartisan support. The next step is for it to make it past the Senate onto his desk, and then he'll sign it into law. So I think that like I said, it's a great step moving forward, but I want to talk to you guys a little bit about what this involves. Now, we heard the president read a script I don't know if he wrote it or somebody else wrote it, talking about a few principles that he believes is effective for making a difference. A huge thing is that this gives people rehabilitation and redemption.